Welcome back to the channel Miracle Fighters, it's Peyton, and today I'm back for yet another Clan Selection deck profile. This time, I will be showcasing Max's Neo Nectar Maiden of Stand Peony deck. Right, so this deck is a deck that you can build from Clan Selection PLUS Vol.1, and it is a deck that once again builds upon the Neo Nectar plant token playstyle. However, unlike Sephiroth and Asha, this deck goes back to the roots of V-era Neo Nectar, using the most basic plant token. The Maiden of Stand Peony deck utilizes the original plant token for easy plussing and most importantly to multi-attack. Before Maiden of Stand Peony arrived, Neo Nectar was one of only two clans that could not multi-attack, right? The other being Oracle Think Tank, which unfortunately to this day is still unable to multi-attack. In V Premium at least. But yeah, Neo Nectar was basically the last Force clan that could only attack for 3 times only. And now with Maiden of Stand Peony, we finally can exceed the 3 attack playstyle to go beyond that. So the Maiden of Stand Peony is a deck that can make 5 attacks with high power and also a way around control clans. So before we jump right into the deck, here's the format of this video. Basically, I'll start the first segment by explaining the main card, which is Maiden of Stand Peony. And then for the second and third segment, I've split the units in this deck into 2 main groups. The token generators and the token consumers, as I will call them. So every card in this deck is either a token generator or a token consumer, or both, or a grade 3 searcher. So these 2 main groups, the generators and the consumers, fulfill different roles, obviously. And I think it's easier and more logical if I do this deck profile by talking about them as 2 separate groups. Of course, things in this world and in Planet Cree aren't always black and white, so we do have a couple of cards that are both generators and consumers. So for those, I've already segregated into what I feel is their main type or main group, and that's where I'll talk about them in. Now that you guys know how I'm going to do this deck profile, let's get right into the deck profile. So we start off first with the starter. Max is using Arboros Dragon Ratoon for reasons that we'll talk about later on, but basically you can use any starter. It's just that Ratoon is probably the most useful one, just because his name has Arboros in it. And there are certain Neo Nectar cards, right, in this clan, not in this deck, but in this clan that, that requires the Arboros name. But anyways, the starter you can play anything, just Ratoon because it's cute dragon. Okay, so let's begin with the main grade 3. We're playing 4 copies of Maiden of Stand Peony, or rather Max is playing 4 copies of Maiden of Stand Peony. So, Maiden of Stand Peony has 2 effects, the first of which is actually just a carbon copy of Maiden of Trading Roses effect. On place, Maiden of Stand Peony can call up to 1 plant token to rearguard circle. If she's placed on Vanguard instead, which means when you ride her, she calls 2 plant tokens. So basically these are the plant tokens that she calls, the 5k plant tokens that can boost and attack. So no matter how low powered these plant tokens may be, there are still cards that you can attack and boost with. So this on-place effect can be seen as giving you a plus in terms of, I guess, field advantage. Many cards in this deck, as we'll go through them, will require having these disposable plant tokens in play as well. So being able to generate plant tokens for free every time you ride Stand Peony allows for a lot of free advantage, as we'll see with the new support. Maiden of Stand Peony being able to create and field the field on her own also helps make the cost for her second skill even easier to reach. When she attacks anything, she can counter +1 and retire 4 rearguards. If you do, you can call 4 plant tokens to rearguard circle. And if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, your Vanguard, which is herself, and all plant tokens get plus 10,000 power until the end of turn. This skill of hers basically refreshes the field with standing plant tokens when she attacks, and allows you to make up to 5 attacks. The basic strategy is to attack with your double rearguard columns first, before attacking with your Vanguard for a 3rd attack, and then swapping the rested rears for standing plant tokens for an additional 2 more attacks. Since Stand Peony powers up all tokens on the field by 10k, not just the ones that she calls, sometimes it's also a good idea to leave a plant token behind the Vanguard to act as a 15k booster mid-battle, allowing your center column to hit a magical 38k, as long as your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater. Speaking of which, do have to note that the power up, right, only occurs if the opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater. So if you're going first, your plant tokens may not be able to hit without trigger boosts and stuff. Hence, Max generally plays Force 1 for this deck, just so your plant tokens can hit for at least 10k guard or higher for your 4th and 5th swings. Right, because just the column of plant token is just 10k. and if opponent checks like damage triggers or whatnot, they may not be able to hit. So that's something you have to take note of. Force 2 still works, right, especially if you're going second, but generally Force 1 tends to be better since the turn after Stand Peony's multi-attack, you're back to a whole field of tokens, and 10k 2 crit columns just aren't as effective as 20k 1 crit columns. Multi-attacking with Force 1 is also just as scary and scales better into the late game as well. Hence, for the Stand Peony deck, Max generally chooses Force 1. So overall, Stand Peony introduces a very simple but effective multi-attack that allows Neo Nectar to have strong finishing power and makes it such that our final push is not screwed over just because our opponent had 3 PGs in their hand. All the remaining cards in this deck, in one way or another, will act as support for the Stand Peony playstyle. Stand Peony is basically the only grade 3 that you want to ride in this deck, right, because of just how good her effect is compared to your other grade 3s. And as I've mentioned, this deck is obviously a Stand Peony deck, so she's definitely your best right target. There are, however, alternative and secondary rights that you guys may consider that I will talk about towards the end of the video in the alternative section. Anyways, for the rest of the deck, we have a split between your token generators and your token consumers. We'll begin with the token generators. So token generators, well, as evident from the name, are basically cards that help to call plant tokens when they themselves are placed. Stand Peony is an example of a token generator in this deck. So there are 2 main reasons as to why plant token generators are still played. The first is that tokens are used as cost and retire fodder for many cards in this deck. A good example will be Maiden of Stand Peony herself. Her effect requires you to retire 4 rearguards, and having token generators really goes a long way in improving the consistency of the deck by creating disposable plant tokens as rearguards that you can retire for Stand Peony's effect. Secondly, plant token generators also help with early aggression. So Token Rush is an actual playstyle and is what contributes to Neo Nectar's strong early game. So many a times, Max's early game token spam and Token Rush is what allows him to start the aggression beginning turn 1 even, right? Because we do have grade 1 token generators in this deck. And Token Rush can actually be pretty scary. It's basically just like your grade 1 rush decks that were present in like G era and stuff like that. Right, just rush the opponent before they could even do anything. So that's actually a legit playstyle for the Neo Nectar clan because of how many cheap token generators that they do have. So let's get right into the cards. Pensy Musketeer Sylvia is the most basic example of a token generator. She's played at 3 in this deck, and her effect doesn't get easier than this. So when placed on Vanguard and Rearguard Circle, you may call a plant token to Rearguard Circle. Even though this ability has been repeated so many times in the standard Neo Nectar, all of them still see play in some form or another in all the Neo Nectar decks because of the reliance of the clan on plant tokens, as I've mentioned. So 3 Sylvias, you don't really need 4, right? 3 should be just nice. 4 is a little bit too much. She doesn't really do anything other than create plant tokens. And Neo Nectar has a lot more other interesting grade 2s that you might want to play over Sylvia. Right, so next token generator that we have is your Osmanthus Maiden Anelma. This card came out with Asha. Anelma's effect is on place on Vanguard and Rearguard Circle, you may counter +1 and so +1 to draw a card and call up to 1 plant token. This is essentially Sylvia, but with an added cost, giving you an additional draw to your hand. Since this deck is very counterblast light and doesn't really use Soul as well, Anelma is a really great card to use up the spare resources, whilst giving you a plus to your hand and a plus to your field. Anelma also has a second ability to grant all your rearguards with the same card name as your grade 3 or greater Vanguard the ability to boost. This is less relevant for this deck, since you don't focus on cloning or units, and it's more for the Asha deck. Though in certain occasions, if you get lucky and end up calling, a Stand Peony to Rearguard Circle, being able to boost with any unit on the field can be pretty fun as well. So for these 2 token generators, as you can see here, Max is playing them at 3 copies each. Sylvia for the free token generation, and Anelma for that +1 draw to your hand. The +1 draw can be really helpful to help you dig for pieces and stuff like that. Other than the grade 2s, we have actually 2 more plant token generators in our grade 1 slots. The Maiden of Sweet Berry and the Maiden of Flower Carpet, which is actually a card from Clan Selection as well, thus showing us that, the clan just cannot make do without token generators. Similarly to Anelma, these 2 grade 1 token generators have secondary effects on top of calling a plant token to Rearguard Circle. For example, Sweet Berry here, Soul charges when placed, besides calling a plant token to Rearguard Circle. However, the Soul charge only occurs if your Vanguard is grade 2 or greater. As I mentioned, the deck doesn't really use much resources other than counterblasts, which is only really used by 2 cards in this deck, right? And Soul is only used by Anelma, which isn't even maxed out in this deck. So the Soul isn't that relevant in this deck, but I guess in a way she fuels Anelma as well. Additionally, Sweet Berry also has a second effect, which is on Rearguard Circle continuous during your turn. If your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, she gets plus 5000 power. This means that she becomes a continuous 13k attacker or booster, as long as the Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, which allows the deck to actually hit some pretty magic numbers, I guess. So 13k booster, boosting your grade 2 10ks basically form a 23k column. Very basic skill, but a very effective skill. So 4 copies of Sweet Berry. And then the other great one, Maiden of Flower Carpet, which is also played at 4 off, is a spicy new card. So her first effect is just the same as Sylvia, but her second effect is what makes her really interesting in this deck. From the drop zone at the end of a turn, you may retire 2 plant tokens and return herself to your hand. This ability is hard once per turn to, I guess, prevent yourself from emptying out your entire field. So this skill basically means that she's a recyclable token generator, right? Even though you're losing 2 tokens to get her back from the drop zone, she herself generates tokens anyways the next turn when you call her. So technically, in terms of card economy, you're not really losing anything. In fact, you're trading 2 weak low-powered units on the field, your tokens, for a grade 1 8k with 10k shield to your hand, which you can call next turn to generate another token onto the field. Flower Carpet being a grade 1 with 10k shield and being recyclable means that you sort of have a defensive play going on with her as well. You can afford to guard with her early and still be able to fetch her out of the drop zone later on if you ever need her. This also makes her a prime target to be retired for Maiden of Stand Peony's effect, since you can just retire the token called out by Peony to get her back. If you ever need to discard cards, like for example for the grade 3 Searcher or for Perfect Guards, she's also a good card to be chosen as well, right? Because you can always just get her back whenever you need to. Maiden of Flower Carpet is also the best red target in this deck, because if you write her and then you call or write Anelma, you can use Anelma's skill to Soul Blast her out, to draw a card, get a plant token, whatnot, and then retire your 2 plant tokens you have on the field because of Anelma and her own effect to retrieve herself back from the drop zone. All in all, Maiden of Flower Carpet is a really nice card for the deck, and we are playing her at 4 copies. So these are basically all your main token generators, and we have a total of 14. 3 each for the grade 2s and 4 each for the grade 1s. As I've mentioned, cards in this deck either create tokens or use up tokens for costs and abilities. So next segment, we will be discussing the other set of cards that have the ability to convert tokens to hard pluses and power. These are the token consumers, as I call it, and they form the remaining portion of the deck. So let us begin with Exploding Tomato. Yes, so even though I mentioned that Maiden of Stand Peony is the only grade 3 that you want to write in this deck, that does not mean we aren't playing additional rearguard based grade 3s, like this guy here, as you can see, Exploding Tomato. So Max has chosen to play Exploding Tomato, a card that he used to play way back in Cecilia or even Arboro's days. So Exploding Tomato has 2 abilities. The first is, on Vanguard and Rearguard Circle activated, you may retire 2 plant tokens to draw a card and give itself plus 10,000 power. Essentially, on the turn that you write into Maiden of Stand Peony, you can immediately use Exploding Tomato to convert the tokens to a solid plus in hand. Also, after turning whole field into tokens by Maiden of Stand Peony's effect, you usually want to call your other stronger attackers from your hand, and Exploding Tomato allows you to clear up the field and free up some circles and space on the field while not losing out too much in terms of card advantage and power, since he allows you to draw and give himself power. Adding 10k makes Exploding Tomato one of the bigger attackers without boost in this deck, right? He's able to hit 23k on his own, which is fantastic as well. Using Sweet Berry, just now that great one that I talked about, the 13k booster, in the same column, will give you a beautiful 38k column without counting force markers. So yep, that's his first skill. And the Tomato, however, is not a pure token consumer. In fact, just like Carpet, he himself can also generate tokens. So at the end of the battle that Exploding Tomato attacked, you may retire itself and call up to 2 plant tokens to a rearguard circle in the back row. This ability basically allows you to create boosters mid-battle without using cards from your hand. What Max sometimes does is that he leaves his back row 2 circles empty, and he will attack with his Tomato first, and then retire Tomato at the end of its battle to split itself into 2 tokens to boost the other 2 columns. If the opponent isn't careful and doesn't notice Exploding Tomato's second effect, the opponent may also end up planning the guard strongly as well. Also, since Exploding Tomato converts himself to 2 cards, it actually makes paying the cost for Maiden of Stand Peony much easier, since you now have the liberty to keep one of your regular rear guards on the field. This is because Exploding Tomato is giving you 2 bodies on the field in exchange for 1 body. So you get a +1 body on the field, a +1 plant token that you can retire for Maiden of Stand Peony's effect. Overall, Exploding Tomato is a really solid backup card, though Max is only playing it at 2 because it's not exactly a super needed card in his deck, and we don't want to run too many of it because we don't want to be riding it as well. The deck is pretty reliant on having Stand Peony as your winning grade 3, right? So our only right target should remain Stand Peony. Having lower counts of grade 3s also allows us to play more grade 2s and 1s, which Neo Nectar has many of great quality, and playing more grade 2s and 1s also means that the deck's shield is overall higher, right? But Exploding Tomato, 2 copies should be enough. The remaining token consumers are basically found in our grade 2s and 1 slots. Max is playing 4 copies of this new grade 2 from the Clan Selection set. It came out together with Flower Carpet and Stand Peony, and that is the Maiden of Fall Vine, or as Max always calls wrongly, Maiden of Fine Veil, right?
Call Maiden of Fine Veil. Oh please. Call Maiden of Fine Veil.
I think it's because Max is always confused by the F and V, but yes, Fall Vine. So Fall Vine's effect is when placed from hand on a rearguard circle with a plant token, you get to draw a card, and she gets plus 5k until the end of turn. In other words, her effect is basically just to retire a plant token, draw a card, and gets 5k. In essence, with her effect, you're replacing your plant token on a field that you have generated out with your other plant token generators, or with Stand Peony's second ability for a better attacker in the form of Fall Vine. On the turn Fall Vine is placed, she's 15k, which, boosted by any grade 1 in this deck, hits for 23, allowing you to hit magic numbers. Fall Vine's effect is also free, and free draw power is always welcomed. So overall, Fall Vine is just a really great card that gives you free advantage basically. One thing to add about the Maiden of Stand Peony deck is that I'd much rather play cards with on-place effects than cards with activated abilities. And that is because most of the time you'll be retiring your rearguards anyways with Maiden of Stand Peony. So, you know, having really good on-place effects oftentimes is more useful than having activated effects. And Maiden of Fall Vine has an on-place effect, which makes her synergize really well with Stand Peony. Similarly, in the grade 1 slot, we also have another card that is pretty much a Maiden of Fall Vine, but in grade 1 form, and that is Sergeant Malnasu. Max is playing at 3 copies. So this is the Eggplant Sergeant. This card has an errata, but basically he works in the same way as Fall Vine. He'll call himself on top of a card with 10k or more power, and you get +1 draw an additional power boost of 10k, bringing his power up to 15k because he's a 5k base. Now you might be wondering, how do you exactly use this card? Because plant tokens aren't exactly 10k power in this deck, right? Without the Arboros support cards. Well, this card is one of the reasons why Max also prefers Force 1 in this deck. That is because a regular plant token on a Force 1 circle, on a circle with a Force 1 marker, becomes 15k, which will be able to fulfill Sergeant Malnasu's condition. If you're even desperate for the draw, you might even consider calling him on top of grade 2s on the field, like for example Sylvia or Anelma, which are all on-place effects as well. So yeah, I don't have to say too much about him. Basically, he's the same as Fall Vine. It just gives you free advantage. It doesn't make you lose out in terms of card advantage overall. The reason Max is only playing it at 3 is because it's a 5k base. You don't want to be caught riding this card because your opponent can rush you down, especially in V Premium. Right, 5k base is definitely not good on Vanguard Circle. As for our last consumer, the last consumer has slightly more utility than the on-place ones, and that is the Maiden of Nepenthes. So Maiden of Nepenthes was once a Japanese exclusive promo, and I'm sure all Neo Nectar players are really thankful that she's printed finally in Clan Selection. Nepenthes, although worded differently, works pretty much the same way as Fall Vine and Sergeant Malnasu, except she has a little bit more versatility in the way that you use her. So on Vanguard Circle and Rearguard Circle, you may retire a plant token to draw a card and give yourself plus 5k until the end of turn. Not only that, she also gets the ability to boost. The ability to boost is really nice, as she can become a 15k booster. A 15k booster boosting your Vanguard, which is Maiden of Stand Peony, hits for 28k, which is a magic number. Being a booster also allows you to just plop her in the back row behind the Vanguard Circle and allows you to keep your left and right columns clean for your multi-attacking plant tokens. The ability to boost also ties in really well with her second ability, which is when she boosts a grade 3 Rearguard, you may have the boosted unit get plus 1 critical until the end of that battle. At the end of the battle, put Nepenthes into your soul. This ability usually doesn't get used too much by Max in his deck due to the fact that her disappearance may interfere with the cost of his Stand Peony because you need to retire 4, right? And her disappearing means that you basically have to retire everything else on the field. Sometimes you don't really want that, or sometimes you don't really have that many Rearguards to retire anyways. But having said that, this effect can still come in handy as a finishing move to close the game with the double critical attack. As mentioned just a few minutes ago, Exploding Tomato is one of the strongest Rearguard attackers, and just nice he happens to be a grade 3. So you could technically have a strong 38k 2 crit column, right, with these 2 cards to try to push for game. 38k 2 crits is forcing 30k guard, a crit sentinel guard on your opponent. And that's not counting force 1 markers, which is what Maxi is going for with this deck. Exploding Tomato's ability to call out 2 plant tokens at the end of the battle that he attacked also works well with Nepenthes, because Nepenthes disappears, but then Tomato calls out 2, right? So it sort of makes up for the lack of, for Nepenthes' few disappearance, which makes them a really nice tag team as well. So yep, Max is playing 3 Maiden of Nepenthes. Really nice card that you guys may even consider upping to 4. But I guess 3 is working out for Max, and so he's playing 3. To be honest, a lot of the ratios of cards in this deck are pretty free, right? It really depends on which cards you prefer and how much space you have in this deck. So you actually have a lot of freedom in deciding your card choices for the Stand Peony deck. Since it's not limited to any archetype, so you don't have to play, 4 copies of a certain archetype for your grade 3s, grade 2s and grade 1s. You can play anything you want. And there are a lot of generically good cards in Neo Nectar in terms of the grade 1 and grade 2 slots. So that's why in the alternative section, I think you do have quite a number of cards to cover as well. But anyways, that's 3 Maiden of Nepenthes, and that basically rounds up all the token consumers that we have in this deck. So once again, with how this deck works, you generally will end up with a field of tokens at the end of the turn, right? With Stand Peony calling out 4 replacing your Rearguards with 4 plant tokens. These token consumers that I just talked about here will help you to clear the field, open up more space for you to play more cards, whilst also converting your the retired plant tokens into hand cards and also absorbing the power of the token into themselves. As you might notice, 4 Vine and Nepenthes both get plus 5,000 power. Tomato gets 10,000, Manasu gets 10,000 as well. This allows the deck to really hit hard while fully utilizing all your resources. If you're going to be replacing your tokens anyways, which most of the time you will be, because they're not really that good attackers, right? Not until Stand Peony calls them out. So most of the time you want to be replacing them at the start of your turn, or rather during your main phase, right after you Stand Peony turn. And since you want to replace them, you might as well get some, draw power or some attack power off of them as well. Drawing cards for free is always nice in this game, since you can always stick for additional pieces, you can just build up a hand size, maintain a large hand size, while also having multi-attacks. That's basically how the Maiden of Stand Peony deck plays. Because of all this draw power that the deck is capable of, as you can see, right here we have 4 free, pretty much free drawing cards. Max almost never miswrites or misgrades, and always draws into his 4th Maiden of Stand Peony. Despite that, it's still nice to play grade 3 Surges to further ramp up consistency of riding Maiden of Stand Peony. Hence, the last normal unit that Max is playing is the basic grade 3 Surger that every clan now has. So for Neo Nectar is the Valkyrie of Reclamation Pack Mini. Like a top 5 for grade 3, add it to your hand and discard 1. So very simple. But she also has another clan exclusive effect, which is continuous on Vanguard and Rearguard Circle during your turn. If you have 2 or more token units, she gets plus 5,000 power. With the amount of grade 1s and 2s that can generate plant tokens in this deck, even the grade 3s can generate plant tokens, you can probably imagine how easy it is to fulfill Pat Mini's condition of plus 5k. So she's also a nice card that you can put behind the Vanguard circle for a consistent 13k booster. Right, her and Sweet Berry are really good 13k boosters. In fact, I like myself a back row of Sweet Berries and Pat Minis. Right, 13k boosters along with your grade 2s, especially the ones you can get plus 5k like Nepenthes and Forvine. 13k boosting 15k grade 2s, you're healing for 28k, and that's not counting Force 1 markers. 28 is already a heal guard for pretty much all Vanguards, except for like certain grade 4s and stuff, but those decks aren't played as much, so this deck's ability to hit for magic numbers and for high numbers is super easy. Now that we have all the normal units out of the way, we can get right into the triggers. So standard trigger lineup, and I think it's the best trigger lineup, I guess, for the Stand Peony deck. That is just the standard 4 draws, 4 heals, and 8 crits. Very generic lineup, but very effective. So with the way that this deck is played by Max, he generally chooses Force 1, as I've mentioned. Having high amounts of crits in this deck, right, 8 or more, will increase the chances of checking crits to make up for the lack of built-in crits for this deck. Because the deck draws a lot already, extra draws are not that important. So I think 4 should be the maximum you need for this deck. The only reason that we are still playing draws is because perfect shields, right, perfect guards are still very much useful against many decks out there right now. Though I can definitely see a Maiden of Stand Peony deck playing 12 criticals with the crit sentinels as well. So yep, that's for the trigger lineup, and with that we've basically gone through the entire deck. However, we're not exactly done with this video. As I mentioned from the beginning of the video, there will be a lot of alternatives that you guys can consider other than the cards that we've shown over here. So there are a lot of splashable Neo Nectar cards that I feel can be played in the Stand Peony deck. So here's some alternatives that you guys may want to consider. We'll start off first with the grade 3s. In fact, we'll start off first with a whole engine on its own. This is the Sephiroth Arboros Dragon engine. We'll first have a look at Sephiroth. So Sephiroth is a possible backup grade 3 for the deck other than Exploding Tomato. So Sephiroth has 2 effects. The first is on Vanguard Circle, continuous all plant tokens that they call are 10k plant tokens. These are 10k plant tokens. 10k plant tokens are basically improved versions of the 5k tokens in that they have higher power, they have shield value, and they have the ability to intercept and boost. As for Sephiroth's second effect, once per turn on Vanguard and Rearguard Circle, you may retire a Rearguard to call up to 2 plant tokens to Rearguard Circle, and if you have 5 or more Rearguards, basically a full field board, Sephiroth gets plus 10,000 power until the end of turn. Because of the number of token generators that we have in this deck, getting a full field to fulfill Sephiroth's second ability is not difficult with the Neo Nectar deck, and more often than not, Sephiroth will be a free 23k beat stick. Since Maiden of Stand Peony is better when going second, since you want your opponents to be on grade 3 on a grade 3 Vanguard, right? If you play Sephiroth as the backup instead of Tomato, you have the option of riding Sephiroth first to set up a field and further expand upon the token beatdown playstyle. With the rest of the deck, you can easily fill the field with our 10k plant tokens for not only offense, but defense into your opponent's turn, especially since 10k plant tokens have 10k intercept as well, as I've pointed out earlier. So yeah, Sephiroth is definitely a decent backup grade 3 that you can play, right? If you really want a backup grade 3 for this deck. The other Arboros cards also works really well as backup cards for this deck. So the other Arboros cards will be Arboros Dragon Timber and the Gale of Arboros Oliver. Timber is basically another token generator, similar to Sylvia, though he can only call plant tokens if it's on Rearguard Circle, and on Vanguard Circle, instead of calling plant tokens, he turns your next plant token that you call into a 10k plant token, so it's like a mini Sephiroth. As for Oliver, Oliver requires you to have 2 Arboros in Soul in order to play his effect, which is Counterblast 1 on Vanguard and Rearguard Circle activated. Once per turn, you may either call 2 plant tokens to Rearguard Circle or retire 2 Rearguards to get a whopping 20,000 power plus 1 critical to himself. Oliver is probably one of the strongest token consumer and generator in the game, being able to either get 2 bodies on the field or hit straight for 30k 2 crits unboosted on his own. Playing Oliver will allow the Maiden of Stand Peony deck to have built-in crit pressure, which is something that the deck lacks right now. And it overall works really well with the Force 1 leaning playstyle that Stand Peony currently has. However, if you want to use Oliver, you will need to play some kind of Arboros cards in your deck to fulfill this restriction. And that's why I pointed out Timber and Sephiroth. And remember at the beginning of the video I said that Arboros Dragon Ratoon is the preferred starter for this deck. That's because if you use Oliver and Arboros Dragon Ratoon is your starter, you're already halfway there for Oliver's effect. Since Ratoon will be a guaranteed Arboros card in your soul, you just need to write into either Timber or Sephiroth later on. I personally think that if you manage to fit the Arboros cards into Maiden of Stand Peony, Oliver can become a really great finisher alongside Stand Peony's multi-attack as well. Actually, Arboros also has a great one. I didn't really consider him in the alternative options because it's more useful in a fully dedicated Arboros deck, right? And that's Arboros Dragon Branch. So he's basically the Arboros Searcher. But I guess if you guys really want to go all in on the Arboros strategy, you guys could play him. Right? It's just that the deck may become more of a hybrid style deck, or the deck may turn into more of an Arboros style deck. So right now we're going for the Maiden of Stand Peony style deck. So our focus is still Maiden of Stand Peony, right? But yeah, this is just a mini engine that you can, I guess, add into the deck to create some variety out of games. Other than the Arboros engine, Neo Nectar also has a lot of great 2 units. Since we fill the field with tokens after a Stand Peony turn, and the opponent usually doesn't get rid of them, calling cards like Kaivant on the following turn can grant him big amounts of power. Especially if your opponent doesn't kill off your plant tokens and you have like what, 2 or 3 plant tokens remaining on the field, Kaivant can get plus 10 to 15,000 power. Ermin Soul is also a nice card if you want extra draw power and extra column power as well for the deck. As for the grey ones, we have even more options. Corolla Dragon can become a beefy booster, especially with the amount of superior calling that we do. Right, calling plant tokens is considered calling rearguard by card's ability. And also Stand Peony single-handedly calls 4 plant tokens on her own. This makes Corolla Dragon a 20k booster minimum on a normal Stand Peony turn. If you play Corolla Dragon, he's best put behind the Vanguard, so that when he boosts and you use Maiden of Stand Peony's effect, you can power up your center column at the same time as when you call the plant tokens. Fruits Basket Elf, which is also included in Clan Selection, is also a decent token generator that utilizes your abundance of soul and powers up the tokens that you create. He synergizes with Melnasu as well by creating pseudo 10k tokens, which fulfills the condition for Sergeant Melnasu. Knight of Cold Prosperity Craig has the ability to power up your tokens in the same row, which means horizontally by 5k continuously. This makes your token boost for even higher numbers, as high as 20k on a Stand Peony turn. Lastly, Maiden of Dream Shower, similarly to Craig, bars your tokens, but she is even more extreme. For a counterblast and a grade 3 Vanguard restriction, she gives all token units on your field plus 10,000 power. With Maiden of Dream Shower, your columns will easily hit for 30k, which is a heal guard, without counting other power boosts and force markers. And there we have it basically for all the alternatives. So quite a sizable number compared to the other deck profiles that I've done on this channel. And I think that's because all the Neo Nectar builds in Standard focus on only one thing, and that is tokens. Right, be it 5k tokens, 10k tokens, or Asha, Fairy tokens, all the support involves plant tokens, and even Asha appreciates having plant tokens to retire as cost for bringing out your Asha Fairy tokens. All in all, the Maiden of Stand Peony deck is well supported, and I do feel that it is a top contender for Neo Nectar's strongest Standard or V Premium deck. Now before I end off this video, I just have a couple of thoughts on the matchups and the pros and the cons of this deck. In terms of matchups, I think that Maiden of Stand Peony's ability to swap rearguards for plant tokens really shines in control matchups. For example, if you're up against field control decks, which include Retire and Bind heavy decks like Kagero Blade Master, the entirety of Narukami, and most importantly Star Vader Chaos Breaker Dragon, you don't have to worry as much about your field. Because your field will be left with merely just plant tokens at the end of your turn after using Maiden of Stand Peony's effect, control decks have nearly no effect on the deck, since your plant tokens are so are the most disposable rearguard that we have, and it's so easy to spawn them out if your opponent ever gets rid of them, and there's no incentive for your opponent to really get rid of them. Locking, in fact, will have no effect on us because according to the rules, plant tokens, when locked, disappear. So there will be no locked unit on our field. You can't give Chaos Breaker power up. They can't retire. They can't get additional imaginary gifts. They can't destroy your imaginary gifts unless they lock your normal units. But that's the thing with Maiden of Stand Peony. You can just retire all your normal units and leave your whole field with tokens, and the Chaos Breaker deck becomes null, I guess. Right, so that's one really good matchup that we have against another Clan Selection deck, I guess. Zirconium really is the main card that will mess our formation up, so that's the card that we do need to take note of. But that's for the lock side. As for the bounce side, right, the main field control deck that will greatly mess up our gameplay will be the upcoming Nubatama Hanzo deck from Clan Selection PLUS Vol.1, because when Hanzo returns tokens to your hand, he also forces us to discard. Since tokens disappear when they leave the field due to the rulings, right, we do not get to return the token cards to our hand, and hence we cannot use them to discard. Thus, in the end, we will be forced to discard normal unit cards from our hand with Hanzo's effect. In fact, Hanzo can return the entire field back to the hand. So with Maiden of Stand Peony, generally we'll be left with 2 to 4 cards on the field. 2 if you use Carpet skill, 4 if you don't, and it will end up with us minusing 2 to 4 cards from our hand. So Flower Carpet is really important in that kind of matchup against Hanzo, where we want to minimize the number of plant tokens that we have on our field before we pass the turn to our opponent. Besides control matchups, I guess against the majority of clans, we just do what we do. We multi-attack, we just generate free advantage and hope that our 5 strong powered attacks can overcome and break through the opponent's defenses. So overall, I feel that the Stand Peony deck is rather light on resources, with Stand Peony and Anelma here being the only counterblasters, and Soul is generally untouched other than by Anelma as well. So damage denial doesn't really work on us, since all we need is just 1 counterblast for a strong beatdown turn with 5 attacks. And these 5 attacks, most of the time we can dish out probably 2 to 3 damage at once. Overall, the deck is honestly very straightforward and is a great starting deck for beginners. None of the cards in this deck truly minuses. Everything is so cost effective and so easy to play and master. While certain players may feel that gameplay may become too simple and bland, but sometimes, simple is just what works best. If you guys really want to spice things up, I do highly recommend the Ouroboros cards that I talked about, because they can add another level of depth, I guess, into your gameplay. But if you just want to play the regular one, the regular build like what Max does, which is highly effective as well, then of course go ahead. In fact, I think this deck is super cheap as well. It's very budget friendly. So once again, this deck is probably the best deck that you can give to let a new player try out if they want to play V Premium, right? So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this deck profile, and I hope it was helpful. If you have any comments or queries or suggestions for the deck, do leave them down in the comment section below. Max and myself will definitely answer them. So yep, that's pretty much it. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.